Previously on A Love That Lingered, Arthur and Grace savored the bliss of their first weeks of married life, clinging to moments of peace despite the growing unease of letters speaking of battles near the border. Their days were filled with tenderness, but a shadow had begun to creep across the horizon, hinting at choices that could tear their fragile joy apart. This is episode 23, The Weight of Duty. The morning sun spilled across the grand windows of Caldwell Manor, catching on the gilded edges of paintings and shimmering against the polished floors. The air smelled faintly of lavender from Grace's arrangements in the hallways, though beneath it lingered a taut stillness, something unspoken, something heavy. Arthur sat in the study, a letter in hand. Though he had read it so many times, the words no longer needed ink to be remembered. News of skirmishes had been whispered in markets, carried into taverns, and now it had landed squarely at his door. The border is thinning. Men are needed. Nobles must stand with their people. He rubbed his temple, his aquamarine eyes betraying nothing of the storm inside. Grace, ever watchful, had noticed his sleepless nights growing more frequent. She entered quietly, a book tucked under her arm, pausing when she saw the unreadable mask on his face. "Another letter?" she asked softly. Arthur folded it quickly, as though hiding a weapon. "Merely news from the south," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. The peace of their new life seemed fragile, like glass ready to splinter. Grace crossed the room, setting her book aside, and laid a hand gently on his shoulder. He leaned into it for just a moment, the mask slipping enough for her to see. The man weighed down by a burden he hadn't yet spoken aloud. And then 3 sharp knocks echoed through the manor. They weren't the polite raps of neighbors or the hesitant knock of a servant. These were deliberate, commanding, and urgent. Oliver was the first to the door, straight-backed, though wary. When he opened it, the morning light framed 3 uniformed men. Their boots were muddied from the road, their faces stern from duty. "We seek Lord Caldwell," one said, voice clipped and official. "The crown calls upon noblemen to answer their country's need." Oliver's chest tightened. He glanced over his shoulder toward the study, where Arthur had already risen to his feet. For a moment, the manor was silent, save for the beating of hearts that knew everything was about to change. Arthur met the soldiers in the grand foyer, his posture composed though his eyes betrayed the faintest flicker of unrest. Grace followed, her gown trailing like a whisper, and Oliver lingered at her side, tense and protective. The tallest soldier, a captain by his insignia, stepped forward and bowed curtly. "Lord Caldwell, by order of His Majesty, we are recruiting men of noble standing and military experience. The border requires leadership, and the kingdom calls upon its sons." Arthur's jaw tightened, though his expression remained measured. "And if a son already serves his household and his people here, my estate, my tenants, my family?" The captain did not flinch. "All must sacrifice. You are needed." Silence hung thick. Grace felt the air shift, the weight of inevitability pressing in. Her hand sought Arthur's, but he gave her only the faintest squeeze before letting go, as though even that touch might sway his resolve. Then, to everyone's surprise, Oliver stepped forward. His dark blue eyes burned with determination, though his hands trembled behind his back. "Take me instead," he said firmly. "I can serve. My lord's life is tied to this estate, to this family. He has responsibilities, Greater than. Arthur cut him off sharply. No! The word echoed with finality, and Oliver flinched as if struck. You are untrained, Arthur continued, voice cold with authority. Do you think bravery replaces skill? You would not last a week, Oliver, and I will not send you to die in my place. Oliver's lips parted, anger sparking. Then you would go yourself? You would leave Lady Caldwell, your wife of mere weeks, and your mother, after all she's already endured? You would take the duty of every man and bind it upon your shoulders as though the rest of us are nothing? Arthur turned away, pacing. The soldiers exchanged looks, but they did not intervene. This was not merely a conversation of war. It was a matter of heart and home. Grace, pale but composed, stepped between them. Enough, she whispered, though her voice carried the weight of steel. She looked to Oliver first. Your loyalty is a gift, but it is not your burden to bear. Arthur is right. You are not prepared for war. And if you fell, she faltered, then steadied herself. Arthur would never forgive himself. Oliver's chest rose and fell with quiet fury, but he said nothing more. Arthur, however, sank into the nearest chair, his hands pressed against his face. His voice was muffled, raw. I swore, Grace, years ago when my father fell, I swore I would never shirk duty, that I would not be the man who turned away when his people needed him. And yet, his hands dropped, revealing eyes rimmed with unshed tears. And yet, for the first time, I want to turn away for you. The soldier shifted, uncomfortable at the intimacy of the moment. Grace knelt before him, taking his hand firmly in both of hers. Arthur Caldwell, she said, steady as the earth. You are my husband, not my sacrifice. Whatever choice you make, I will stand with you. But know this, you are not alone. You are not the boy who carried his father's death alone. You are mine now, and I am yours. Let that weigh equally against the call of duty. Arthur's chest heaved with quiet conflict, his heart torn between oath and love. The silence was so deep, it felt eternal. At last his mother's voice broke it. Ethel had entered unnoticed, her presence commanding yet gentle, her pale features soft with sorrow. My son, Lady Caldwell said, I lost your father to duty. Do not make me lose you the same way. Remember, strength is not only found on the battlefield. Sometimes it is found in protecting what you hold most dear. Arthur's head bowed, torn but not yet decided. The soldiers gave him until sunset to decide. The household fractured under the weight of waiting. Oliver paced like a caged animal, muttering curses under his breath. Grace sat in their room with trembling hands, trying to sew but stabbing her finger again and again. Lady Caldwell lit candles in the chapel, her whispered prayers carrying through the quiet halls. Arthur stood alone in the garden, the summer wind pulling at his hair, the weight of every eye and every expectation heavy upon him. His mind replayed every vow he had made, both as a nobleman and as a husband. He remembered Grace's smile under the altar's arch, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she had looked at him as though he were the whole of her world. He remembered his father's coffin, lowered into the earth as his boyhood ended. One vow had been born of grief, the other of love. Both demanded different sacrifices. When Grace finally found him, he was staring at the distant horizon, eyes haunted. She touched his arm gently. Whatever you decide, she whispered, I will not think less of you. Arthur turned to her then, his face breaking open. "And if I choose wrong? If I stay and men die? If I go and lose this?" His voice cracked. "How do I choose between my country and my heart?" Grace cupped his face with trembling hands, her eyes shining with tears. "Then let your heart guide you, for if you go without it, you will already be lost." Arthur pulled her into his arms, clinging as though she were the anchor of his soul. For the first time since the soldier's arrival, his shaking ceased, not because the decision was made, but because he had remembered what it meant to be whole. As the sun bled into the horizon, the soldiers returned to the manor, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. Arthur stood in the foyer once more, Grace at his side, Oliver behind them like a shadow. Lady Caldwell lingered near the stairs, her hands folded tightly. The captain stepped forward. "Lord Caldwell, your decision." The air stilled, the house itself seeming to hold its breath. Grace's hand tightened in his, her heartbeat loud enough he thought he could hear it.